we have in excess of about 17,500 employees, and our company cleans a very high percentage of the U.S. meat supply. And when I refer to meat, I'm talking red meat, which is pork and beef, some lamb, but that's small, and then the white meat, turkey, and chicken plants. And we clean, we think around 70% of the U.S. Manufacturing facilities of significant size are cleaned by us. And then we also have a large presence in Canada. So if you look at North American meat supply, we're probably cleaning 70% or so of the combined market. The U.S. is dominated by, and really Canada too, is dominated by four major players. One is JBS out of Brazil. One is Smithfield Foods. One is Tyson Foods, and the other one is Cargill. And what's happened as a result, and when I first saw Peter's email talking about this, this is the part of the industry that I have some knowledge of. My knowledge is really based on the sanitation side, but I've kept up on what's happening, though I'm not part of the business anymore. I was for a long time before I sold it to private equity some years ago. And I'm still an investor in it, so I still have some updated information. So what's happened as a result of the pandemic is that many of the meat plants, I don't know if any of you have been following this, but many in the meat plants of the United States have been forced to close for a period of time, sometimes a couple of weeks, sometimes a little bit longer, because of the outbreak that's taken place inside those plants. And the conditions in there during the day, generally during the day, they're running two shifts, and people work fairly close to each other when they're on the parts of the line that does the cutting and packaging. And it's very cold in there because they have to keep it cold because of the meat has to stay fresh. And so it's been a sort of a hotbed for infection. In addition to that, a lot of the employees that work inside these facilities, their living conditions, they have a lot of people living in one house or one apartment. It might be a community of Sudanese or Vietnamese, or it could be all kinds of different, not a very high percentage of Caucasian Americans working inside these processing facilities in most places. And so once somebody gets sick, gets the virus, it's easy that, when people are at home, it could be in lunchrooms, which are crowded. It could be, punching the time clock when they get there, or working in close quarters. It's just been a hotbed for people getting infected. Not so much in our business, because when we're operating at night, generally, we have the temperature of the plant is way higher because we're using really hot water to clean it. And our people are spread out because they all have hoses. And so if they were close together, they'd be spraying each other. And then we also are using a significant volume of cleaning chemicals and sanitizing. So that is not where the virus is thriving. So we don't have that many people that have been sick. But a lot of our people might live with or be married to or, be related to people that are working for the plant themselves. So there are some people that get sick that way. What's happened, though, is that in the slaughter side of the industry, in all of these, the beef, pork, chicken, and turkey is a way smaller business, so it's not as pronounced. When a plant closes, many of these plants slaughter a significant percent of the daily slaughter that takes place. So an example is there's a plant in Worthington, Minnesota that has been closed for several weeks and just reopened, but they were slaughtering 11,000 hogs a day that's their normal throughput. And of course, when they're closed, it's zero. And as they're slowly reopening, they're doing a few thousand a day. They're putting in all kinds of controls, plexiglass partitions, spreading people out, slowing the line down, but it'll be a while until it gets back to its pre-COVID production. And what happens at this, it's a big issue because for chickens, for example, are generally grown for about 6 weeks inside a growing house, and then are scheduled the day that the chicks are put in the growing house are scheduled 6 weeks later to arrive at the Tyson plant at a specific time of day to be slaughtered. Hogs are very similar. Hogs generally take 6 months or so to grow to about 300 pounds, which is how most of the slaughterhouses want them. And so the problem is, if you can't get them to the slaughterhouse on the day they're supposed to, what does the farmer do with them? They don't have room for them in the pens. As the hogs keep eating, They're going to be bigger than 300 pounds. So that's a problem because the equipment is designed to slaughter and process 300-pound hogs. And it just becomes a major issue, a cost of continuing to feed them. Where are you going to keep them all? Because the pigs who are going to be slaughtered the next week that farm is growing are getting bigger and taking up the space that the pigs that were supposed to go off to slaughter were taking. And beef, it's the same kind of problem. Beef are generally grown for about 18 months to get to the desired size. And as you can't take them to slaughter, you end up having more on your farm. The farmland can't support it. The cost gets higher. And then what do you do with them? So what has been happening is there's been a lot of euthanasia being practiced where farmers have nothing to do with the hogs or the chickens or the turkeys. I don't know that it's happened in Turkey yet, but and they're basically killing them and putting them in these big pits or just leaving them on the land, and they're not getting to market. And any one plant is probably slaughtering under 5% of the daily slaughter throughout the country. But when you have 8 of them that are closed, each doing 2 or 3%, you're looking at 20% of industry capacity being shut down. And so we also have a shift because so many restaurants are closed and so many food service and so many stadiums and places that were consumers of meat products, that consumption has switched through the grocery stores. And so there are places where what the plant was making just isn't in demand anymore, and they're not geared up to switch to what consumers want. So that's created a problem. So some of those plants aren't operating at full capacity. And what you have here is you see pictures in the United States of people waiting in line at food banks because so many people were laid off as a result of this virus pandemic. And you have this animals being slaughtered, being euthanized because there's no way that slaughterhouses can pick up the slack. And then what's happening further is when you say, well, why can't the slaughterhouses that are still operating operate more hours and pick up some of that excess? But the problem there is if you have hogs you're growing in Minnesota, if a plant in Texas is still slaughtering, by the time you pay the freight to get them there, the economics are significantly impacted, or you can't even do it because you can't transport animals that long. They're under stress. They have to be fed, and it just ends up being a big mess. And so when I saw Peter's initial email, I said, this is something that maybe a group can get together and try to figure this out. And because it's a major big time problem right now as to what to do with all these animals that are being wasted. And this is going to have a long-term impact because what happens is as the farmers are starting out piglets to be slaughtered in 6 months, if they don't know what the demand for those are going to be, they don't produce as many and grow as many. Same thing happens with the chicken houses. If they're not sure that they're going to be able to slaughter them all, the chicken houses need to have chicks today for what is going to be slaughtered six weeks from now. And it just backs it up. So what happens is that farmers cut back and don't have as many in the pens or in the houses or in the fields and for beef. This could be a multi-year problem to get back to where we were, probably the first half of March. And so that's really what the main issue is here. And, my role in it is really on the sanitation side, which has been doing fine, because when you hear about these plants shut down for 2 weeks to do a complete cleaning, generally it's us that's doing the complete cleaning. So our business has been okay, and actually demand has actually picked up, but it's something that's a big time problem in the industry. And if there's some way to solve this through technology or through some expertise that you guys have, I'm sure that there would be people at the USDA and in many of these state farm associations that are trying to figure this out and really haven't come up with any great solutions that I've read so far. And so that's the main issue. So I'll stop there. That's I've told you most of what I know. And again, not an expert in the slaughter side of things, although I've been in all the plants before and seen them in operation, and see if you guys have any questions I can help with, or direction you think this might take.
Thank you, Dan. What do we have as the start of questions here? Dan, actually, one of the questions I just start off while we're waiting for others, what kind of technology, what kind of machines are used or when you were last working in the slaughterhouses? Like, are they, do you know so far as measurement devices? Have you heard if they've started using any kind of smart devices to measure information? Or I know if the hogs grow too big, they don't fit inside the machine, for example, anymore. Like, how are they measuring and tracking things, tracking information in their systems?
Well, I do know, and this is not an area I'm that familiar with, but I do know that each animal, they can track really exactly where it goes, when it came into the plant, the exact weight that it was, because they pay the farmers based on weight. And there's a great tracking process, obviously, that reaches the grocery store because everything is stamped as a lot number and so forth. So they can trace that back to exactly when it came off the line and what animal. In most cases, they've also technology has helped quite a bit with a lot of the cutting that takes place within the plant too, where they're using lasers to, you know, show the employees or that are operating the machinery exactly where the cut should be made, and it's basically showing up on the piece of meat. And so the technology has improved quite a bit over the years. But I'll say that if you were to go into one of these plants and do it 40 years ago and do it now, you wouldn't notice a whole lot of differences between the two. So there's a lot more robotics. There's a lot more exacting measurement. There's a lot of improvements that have been made so that the sheer brawn of the worker is not all that important. You have people just operating controls on machines, and even with knives, they're, you know, electronic knives that they're just sort of using the robotic part of it. In some cases, they're still doing an old-fashioned, very sharp knife cut. But yeah, it's a major issue. But again, the plants do look very similar to what they looked like years ago. By the way, I just saw yesterday the USDA the government passed a very large relief bill to go to small farmers, because they're not just in meat production, but so many small farmers that had outlets to sell their product through food service and things that are not operating as much, and people that raised beef and pork and poultry are hurting big time because they can't sell their product. And so there's a gigantic relief bill that just got approved, but that will send some of these farmers money, but it's not going to help move the animals that need to be looked at sort of on a more urgent basis.
I see a couple of questions here. John, do you want to share your question first in regards to the smallhold farmers?
Yeah, I mean, I see his question. It just says, do the animals hold value for smallhold farms? They do, but you know, I mean, farmers generally, they're not raising, one farmer is not raising 200 hogs to send, at least the smaller ones, 200 hogs that they're sending every day to a plant. I mean, what they're doing is they're supplying some, maybe 200 to be sent this week, maybe 200 more to be sent 2 weeks from now. And so they definitely hold value. But the problem is if they get to 310 pounds or 320 pounds in the case of a hog, you know, they just don't, the meat plants, it's not that Tyson and Smithfield are saying, you know, we're going to stick by our guns and not take them. It's that the equipment that they have is all calibrated to cut up the 300-pound hog. And yeah, maybe if it's 310, it works, but if it's 320 or 330 or 340, it's a problem. So there could be some redesign, which is probably a more difficult project and somewhat temporary, obviously, because hopefully they hope to get back to what the normal is at some point here in the future. So, but yes, they have value. And just reading a couple other, John also asked, is there any way for smallhold farms to absorb excess quantity? You know, I don't know. It's the smallhold farms there's no way that any of these smallhold farms, if you're thinking they get slaughtered at the farm level, that can happen a little bit. But when you're looking at, say, that plant in Minnesota, and that's not even the biggest one, that's doing 11,000 hogs a day, and there's others that do 15, 17,000 hogs a day. You know, a farmer without machinery and process can do, you know, a way smaller amount and has no way to process the meat. When you go to some of these facilities, they're taking in hogs. They're kind of the opposite of a car manufacturing plant. The car manufacturing plant is bringing in thousands of parts and out comes a car. The hog plants are bringing in a hog and out comes 350 products: bacon, sausage, hot dogs, salami, bologna, all the stuff, right? And so a farmer can't really do that. He's not going to on his farm make bacon, and or make salami. And so there's really no substitute for these large slaughterhouses with the capacity to have this kind of throughput on a daily basis. So I'll stop for a second and see if there's any other questions. I see a couple others written on the chat.
Dan, this is Bob Castro. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Sorry, I'm in a low bandwidth place, so I've kept my camera off so that my audio doesn't fade out. But help me understand from an informatics standpoint. You talked a little bit about the technology in the slaughterhouse, but we know that livestock are more and more getting tagged RFID and other ways. Certainly products are getting codes as they go out the door from a shipping standpoint. Walk me through what the slowdown looked like from an order standpoint, right? How hard is it to predict? I mean, we can't predict the future, but when demand goes up, is the system lagging and reading that? And so when demand went down, what does it look like when someone's canceling an order? Just, the practical logistics. Are you getting a phone call? Are you getting an email? Are you getting a heads up display that says, X number of cuts of beef are no longer in demand at these high-end restaurants and demand is elsewhere? Or is this all kind of word of mouth, analog way of communicating with customers and supply chain?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to this, Robert, but let me just share a couple things. One, the number one place as of last time I looked at this of hot dog consumption in the United States was O'Hare Airport. So picture that, right? So that goes down from whatever it was early March to 5% capacity, 10%. So in the single largest place that consumes hot dogs, 90% of them are gone. And then you look at another large place, which is arenas, football, basketball, baseball, right? So all those went from whatever they were to zero. And so that's really just a weekly order basis where whoever O'Hare is buying hot dogs from was delivering them, probably every day, and the stadiums before every event. So it gets back to the processors pretty quickly that we don't need this many hot dogs anymore. So they have to pivot. And of course, the kind of hot dogs that people buy in grocery stores might be different, and certainly in different packages, because you're not sending packages of 8 or 10 or 12 to the stadiums. You're doing them in big bulk, and so it changes things. And so I think the pivot on all those and the information flow was good, because I'm sure a lot of these, and I don't know this, but I'm sure a lot of these large grocery chains and distributors, Cisco and places like that are using all the latest technology to make sure there's a lot of visibility on the timing of the orders. But that doesn't mean that once it gets back to the plant level, that all of a sudden, if I'm selling 80% of my hot dogs in bulk packaging to these large, facilities, if I can pivot and all of a sudden package different size, maybe people at home want different size or different quality. So it takes some time, because all the equipment is designed to do what the demand was yesterday. And so that kind of thing is happening all over the place. And, if you look at, and I don't know the exact stats, because Cisco is still doing some business because they're supplying hospitals and, some of the other places that are still going. But if you look at their customer list of hotels and airlines and stadiums and, airports, I mean, it's just that all that's gone away. And so it's been a challenge to pivot. But again, that's an issue, but that's one that I think by itself, from what I've read, could be solved, at least close to being solved, whereas the plant's closing for weeks or longer is really the major problem here. There's a map that has been produced that shows state by state where plants are closed, and then you can drill down into it to find out how long or if it's partially open. But I think hogs might have been down to 70% of capacity for a period of time. I think this might not be 100% accurate, but the one of the largest beef kill plants and this longtime customer of ours in Greeley, Colorado. They were closed for three weeks or so. And you took the number one or number two player in the country and in the mecca of where all these cattle are grown. It's a big issue. So I think that's more of the issue than the switch in demand. But again, knowing these companies, my guess is that their technology is very good, and they've spent the money for the right systems to have the visibility of all the ordering.
Thank you.
Sure. A couple other questions on the list here. One of them from David Martinez Moreno. Would you say the volume of meat production changed after this crisis? That I don't know. I think what I've read, and again, I'm no expert on this, is that there are people because of, I don't know about where you live, but where we live, I live in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, the local stores during several of the past weeks have put limits on the amount of meat people can buy. Costco did that in a couple of our grocery stores just because there were shortages. And so what people have had to do is pivot and, switch to other meats if they can get it, or to, non-meat, vegan, vegetarian type things. And so whether that changes long-term, I don't know that. I haven't read anything saying that, but clearly the consumption is down a little bit because of people's inability in some cases to get what they want. And then somebody else said, Robert, you asked a question about the smart grids. Maybe we talked about that one, I guess. So yeah, anything else?
Yeah, that was kind of a lead into the question I asked, which is just, cross-applying solutions from other industries, right? Helping producers and consumers and the intermediaries sort of smooth that transition so that information is getting back. Because, ultimately, if and when things come out the other side, as you very aptly pointed out at the beginning of your presentation, the growth cycle is very important. And so we need to figure out a way, not just to solve the immediate problem, but when we come out of the chute on the other side, to help others make informed decisions, because we can't just suddenly open every restaurant. One other interesting anecdotal thing, I'm living in the Middle East in a major seafood producing country. And, because people are prone to ordering seafood around the world at restaurants more than they are to preparing it at home, there's a disproportionate impact to certain types of foods. And then you pointed out the hot dog situation, right? Which I hadn't thought about. When do I eat hot dogs? It's always running through an airport or at a game. So, any predictive modeling we can help the producers do so that they can plan, even once they get the go order, they can't just turn back on production. I think that's my biggest takeaway from this session.
Right. And picture the hot dog, like picture even like a McDonald's, right? They want a specific size chicken breast. And so McDonald's, though a lot of the drive-throughs have still been open, their business is way down. All the fast food chains are down because it's been, at least up till recently, drive-through only. And so, when those demands change, like if the McDonald's is wanting a 6-ounce chicken breast shaped like this, and nobody else wants those, what does the plant do that's producing, or multiple plants that are producing those 6-ounce chicken breasts? So there has to be a pivot there. And so, and I saw John sort of rolling into your question, the critical date when the industry would have had to become aware of a future plant shutdown to mitigate. I think if only, first of all, they didn't have, these plants really didn't have notice, because what happened was, as testing became available, I don't know, for those of you that aren't living in the US, testing has been, a challenge. And in many cases, when it's come available, these plants start to get some ability to test their employees, and they find out, like today, we've known in the past week maybe that we had some people testing positive, and all of a sudden, you've got 200 of them, right? So we have to close the plant. That decision happens, sort of like right now. And if one plant had closed, there's not that many areas of the country where there's just one plant and nothing else nearby. But when you have the main plant in Minnesota closed, the biggest pork processor, and then the one in Sioux Falls, Iowa closes, and then the one in Sioux City, South Dakota. And so when a bunch of them in one geography close or limit capacity or go from one shift when they were at 2, or half their workforce isn't showing up because they're quarantined, or nervous about being quarantined because they live with somebody who's got a compromised immune, whatever, all this kind of happened in a very short time frame. So there really wasn't a lot of planning that could be done. And as you would expect, it isn't like there's another 15 of these plants throughout the country that are sitting there idle or running at 20% capacity that are able to pick up the demand. So it's something that is sort of carefully evolved over time, that our capacity kind of equals our demand, and most of these plants are running generally at 90+% capacity, and so it's just not as flexible as other manufacturing might be, because there's such a lead time on raw materials, and the transportation is another aspect of it. That when these chickens are put in the chicken houses, the people that own that chicken house know that in 6 weeks, 2 days, and 3 hours, this plant is going to Tyson Green Forest, Arkansas, and it's going to be unloaded at 2:40 in the afternoon, and those chickens are going to be slaughtered from 2:50 to 2:56. I mean, because they're going through a truckload every 8 minutes or 10 minutes, and so they have to have it planned so that each truck knows exactly when it's going to show up, from what growing house, at what size chickens, how long it's going to take, because they can't leave chickens sitting outside in the parking lot too long; they die. So it's a very precise process that really needs a significant amount of lead time to pivot, and it's just something that needs to have a solution that so far I haven't really read of anything that's able to pick this up. So I'll stop for a second. I see a couple other questions here, but I'll stop and see if anybody has anything on that. Okay, I see Michael said, anyone watch Food Inc. and Netflix's Pandemic? I watched Food Inc., mass production and chicken and very prone to disease. Yeah, that's all true. I would not say that meat plants are unsanitary places, though. If you were to go in one of these meat plants after we clean it, you would pretty much think that it's the first day it opened. Every day, these things look like the cleanest, way cleaner than restaurant kitchens, put it that way. We have, a typical large processing plant might have 2,000 people on first shift, 2,000 on second, and our company or another goes in at night with 120 people. We get the floor at midnight. We get done at 6 in the morning. At 6 in the morning, that place looks like it's the cleanest facility you've ever walked into. And it's inspected by us. It's inspected by USDA. It's inspected by the customer. And if there's a feather or a speck of meat, it's re-cleaned or closed until it's clean. So I would say generally it's not a place where human disease has spread easily, although in this current pandemic, that appears to be taking place. But again, like I said earlier, whether that's from happening inside the plants or from people in the community, living with 12 people in one house or one apartment, that could certainly add to the spread. Let's see. How much of your industry's business relies on just-in-time or weekly purchase orders versus long-term delivery? I would say most is long-term delivery. Most of the processors have long-term contracts in place with the growers and the operators of the chicken houses. And there are, I'm sure there's force majeure escape clauses, but that might help the contracts, but I don't know if that helps what do you do with the animals? And there's food shortages. So how do you feed people, when you're euthanizing 10,000 hogs, which is what, I've heard is happening in Minnesota right now. And then Michael asked, must this scale model practice change? What about the large chicken, pork raising operations? The chicken raising has really been kept to, the main players do not do that. They basically farm it out, and you can read all kinds of things about how they control the contracts and they, beat down the growers and that. But generally, in most places, individuals or other small businesses own the growing houses. And so, and the same thing with pork raising, although Smithfield does own a lot of its own pork raising lots, but a lot don't. And there's just long-term contracts in place, and it's not all that lucrative of a business because the pricing is so controlled. Our food up till now, our U.S. food costs have stayed really low throughout the last, dozens of years. And in part because the consumer is used to paying a specific price. And so the processors have really kept the producers the growers from really ever making a significant amount of profit on this. And you talk to some of these people who own 20, 30 chicken growing houses, and they really have trouble eking out a living, and it's hard work to do. So, but if in everybody's, background in technology that we have on this call and in this whole program over the period of time that it's being run here, certainly if there's ideas of what can be done, I'm not sure that goes through me, but it certainly would be fall on open ears for people that run this industry to try to figure out what to do that will avoid them from having to euthanize animals. Anything else? Yeah, John just wrote, we picked a tough one. Yep, if it were easy, it'd probably be done already. So Peter, you still with us here?
I'm still here. So this is all been recorded. So
Okay.
for anyone who missed any of this or who joined late, we've got this will all be available to watch again. And yeah, thank you, Dan. This has been really great insights into the system and the overview of what the problems we're facing are in it.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, and if anybody, everybody's got my contact email. And if anybody wants to send any questions or anything, I'm happy to see what I can do. And Peter, to the extent I can, I'll listen in on some of the other presentations.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's something, I've been thinking about this before I saw, this hackathon program, but I'm interested in coming up with or being part of a solution if there is one, but nothing brilliant has popped into my head at this point.
Okay. Again, just to everyone, in case you don't have specific email addresses of people, when you go to the mentors page, you can click on contact this mentor, and that will send a message to us that we can forward on as well. So in case you don't have Dan's email, or if there's other people of the mentors you wanted to reach or speakers, you can reach everybody that way, or again, just ask me directly too, and I can send on email addresses.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to see, I didn't put up our website anyplace, but the name of the business is Packers, like in meat packers, Packers Sanitation Services, Inc. So the website is pssi.com. And so you can get a feel, at least for the sanitation side of it, from there. And like I said, the main four players are Cargill, which is still private, one of the largest held private companies in the world, and Tyson Foods. Smithfield Foods are U.S. companies, and JBS is headquartered in Brazil. And those are the four. Those, I don't know the exact percentage, but probably dominate 60 to 70% of both the poultry and the red meat industries. So,
All right, great.
All right.
Dan, thank you so much today. I really appreciate
great.
it.
No problem.
All right.
Happy to help.
Have a great day, everyone.